Welcome to our next module titled Sociology and the Study of Social Problems. This module offers a brief introduction to sociology, and then it also gives you a bit of background on sociological research and the role of data in determining the realities of a social problem. And then it describes what social problems are and how they're constructed. So, in the previous module, I supplied a lot of information that's giving you a basic overview of what sociology is, what our theories are, and what sociologists do and think about. In this module, I just want to highlight a bit of that initial introduction and looking at what's called the sociological imagination and the difference between a public issue and a personal issue. So, the sociological imagination allows us to link our personal, individual lives with greater society and the rest of the world. And so, this means that we can look at a particular event or a particular pattern in our own lives and determine whether that pattern or event is caused by our own personal issues or if it's more of a public issue that is beyond our reach. So, personal issues are focused on the individual and may be attributed to some sort of personal or characteristic trait or flaw. A public issue, however, is beyond the individual, and it's usually something that is beyond the individual's control specifically. And so, the example that's given in your text is really similar to what I would use in class. Basically, I like to look at how one might lose their job and how that losing of one's occupation can be viewed as either or a personal issue or a public issue. Now, think about it. If you have a cousin or a friend who has been fired from a job before, you might be able to very objectively view their situation through either or both lenses, right? So if you know them really well, maybe you're like, yeah, it's really sad that you lost your job. But knowing that person, they were late constantly. And they told me repeatedly that they had no idea what they were doing and that they were over their head. Um, on the flip side, when it's a public issue, however, that's where the reason goes beyond the individual. It's not about their individual like work ethic or, like their reliability or dependability. Here, it's more so about what's happening in society, right? So, are we in the middle of a recession or is there an unemployment crisis as was seen with the 2020 pandemic? And so when things become more of a public issue, right, when they are determined by factors beyond the individual's control, then that's where we start to view that same phenomena as being a public issue. And that's when it also comes into under the purview of a social problem as well. Now, that doesn't mean that some personal issues, right, aren't also viewed as public issues, right? So, for example, if there's an issue with like performance or knowledge and skills, we might say, yeah, this is a personal issue, but maybe there's also a connection to our educational system as well, right? And so sometimes the dividing lines there aren't as black and white as we would really prefer that they be. So, the sociological imagination is super helpful here because it reminds us that a lot of our problems can be and are rooted in society and in our social structures. So, what is a social problem, right? Well, it's any social condition that has negative consequences for individuals, our social world, or our physical environment. And those social problems can be seen through multiple lenses, giving them both objective and subjective realities. So, really, this is about whether something is absolutely 100% true, like what is the reality of the situation, or if there's a perception of reality here. And usually in Intro to Sociology, I'm really clear on saying that when it comes to social reality, often there's no difference between whether something is absolute or objective, or whether it is subjective or, perception. Because even if it's just subjective, even if it's just a perceived threat or a perceived reality, we often respond very similarly to how we would to the actual reality. And sometimes it's hard to convince people. And believe me, as a sociologist, this is my day-to-day experience. It's hard to convince people that the objective reality is the truth and that their subjective reality is really being colored by their experiences. It takes that sociological imagination to be able to determine the difference. So, when it comes to that objective reality, this is the actual existence of a particular condition, right? And when it comes to subjective reality, this is an attachment of meanings, right? And those meanings are influenced by our backgrounds, by our experiences, by our socialization and what we've been taught and by who, right? So, attachment of meanings to our realities. And so often there is an objective reality. There is some sort of truth. But how different people view that reality can really be colored by everything that they've experienced and been taught in their lives. What we can do, however, to determine the difference between objective and subjective reality is to confirm an objective reality via data collection. And so you'll see throughout um, this this module and throughout the course that we're often going to be looking at the data to get the story, right? Now, should you trust everyone's data and numbers? No. Okay. Um, a lot of bodies, a lot of entities have an ulterior motive that helps to influence how they collect data, right? How they ask questions and how they're answering questions. And so when you're looking at data, you often want it to be um, information that has been filtered through, either academia or some sort of scholarship and publication process that includes peer review. And peer review requires that your peers, who you have no control over who they are, that they're reviewing your content, that they are critiquing it, that they are sending it back, rejecting it, asking for more revisions, telling you to try this, that, or the other, in order to guarantee that you are presenting data that is, to the best of our extent, that is accurate, that is reliable, that is honest, and full of integrity. Right. So, as a person who has written some academic papers, let me tell you that this is a grueling process and that no one is going to go through it just to get their own agenda through. Right. That's like writing a series of academic research papers for classes just for the fun of it and to prove a point. No one has that energy in 2025. And so just be really careful when you're looking at data. And I'm really excited about this class having giving you the opportunity to learn more about how to responsibly um, uh, um, become literate in reading data and interpreting it. So the last thing I want to talk about here is looking at social constructionism. And really, that's one of the ways, other than through data collection, it's one of the ways that we look at this subjective reality, or that we can pinpoint subjective reality, and looking at how society has constructed a reality, right? So this is something that can get a little abstract, but when we're looking at, for example, um, any sort of like categorical system in society that we use, from race and ethnicity to gender and sexuality and so on, we have to acknowledge that these categories have been socially constructed, right? That we have a perceived idea about how people will behave differently and interact differently based on these categories. And we as a society, or as multiple societies, or even just as a few really powerful people in society, get to determine a subjective definition of these categories. Well, the same can be true for social problems, that we have different entities in society that get to kind of create this subjective definition of what is a social problem and what is the most important social problem, right? And so, for example, when you're viewing media, you notice that all of these different media outlets come at our various problems from different directions. And that's because they get the opportunity to determine what is going to be the headline, right? And they get to determine how much time is spent on it. And they get to determine how they're going to present it and talk about it. And I mean, of course, a lot of this is still being influenced by us as the viewers and their audience. They're going to want to give us something to that's going to make us keep coming back for more. And so it's really important that we look at those subjective aspects of our social problems to understand how a social condition can affect one segment of society and be completely ignored by another segment of society, right? Where, like if you travel around the world, the values, the culture, the ideas, the technology that one group views as being important versus another varies widely. And the same is true for what problems, right, people categorize as being burdensome or troublesome, right? What is considered to be a social problem. So you might have noticed that previously in my welcome video, I mentioned that I'm an applied sociologist. And this is mentioned in the reading when they talk about different forms of sociology. Now, there are lots of different types of sociologists that study very wildly and widely different areas of society and social interaction. But the main difference they're talking about here is basically the division between those who are theorizing, who are thinking, who are, making observations, versus those who are using data in order to solve social problems. And so for my career and training, that's what I learned. I learned how to ask questions, right? And that was a big deal. I am really a stickler about surveys and survey questions and research design because I know how much work and skill it takes to create a high quality study. And I have seen so many people who just want to ask a question and go out there and create a survey and Survey Monkey or something like that, and then start to interpret that data. And I'm like, oh no, 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 that's not what that's not what's being said here. It doesn't mean what you think it means, right? And so social research um, and data are really important to the study of social problems because it expands what we know and it helps us to identify what can be done. But that means that you have to get the skill set to do so, right? So if you see a politician who's just like, yeah, I did a survey and asked constituents what's most important to them, you should probably ask some follow-up questions like, what makes you basically credible to do a survey? How did you ask these questions and who did you ask? Who are these constituents, right? Were they your cousins who live in your district? Like, what is the background and what's happening here? Because we need this stuff to be as transparent and reliable as possible so that we can actually solve problems. So, social problems require social action, right? And social action, through sociological research and other social sciences, of course, as well, we can um, address these social problems at their structural levels and even at the individual level as well. So, what does this look like to transform a problem into a solution? Well, one of the ways that we do this is through social policy, which is basically the formalized, the codified enactment of a course of action through some sort of formal program or formal law. right? And so you could probably think of some policies, social policies, that have been impactful in your life or in the lives of those who are close to you, family or friends. These could be policies that are at the county level, that are, at the state level or federal level, or it could be something that's happening in your school district or here at the JC or so on. Now, social policies are often brought into existence by social advocates. And these are people who use resources, right, to support, to educate, to empower individuals and communities. And usually they're trying to change or create policies. They're trying to improve our standards of living. And they're often trying to mobilize people as well, to get people active, right? To show people, why they should care and how they can be involved. And then finally, we might even see some social innovations. So these are policies, programs, advocacy that feature some sort of unique approach, right? They're untested, they've never been tried before. Unfortunately, we don't get to see these very often because people are scared of change, right? They fear change. Um, for example, as I'm recording this video, Martin Luther King Jr. Day is coming tomorrow. And now we're all like gung ho, yay, MLK, he's the guy. But in the past, people were absolutely not into him. They thought even his most innocent plights were rebel rousing, right? That he was a problem, that he was causing chaos and anarchy just by simply sitting, on a bench at a diner. Nobody was quoting him. Even people who supported what he believed in were afraid to show that support publicly. And all the ideas, the policies, the programs that came out of the civil rights movement, which was led in part by MLK, were definitely social innovations, right? They were frightening for many people in the United States. And so social innovations, I really think that they are super important to creating change. I think that when we see protests and advocacy, like defund the police, for example, maybe you know, that paradigm won't end up being the solution, but it could create some sort of innovation. And for example, asking us to question okay, well, let's think about the history of policing. And instead of trying to just get the perfect model based on our existing model of policing, how could we innovate policing? How could we change it? Or who should be responsible for it? Right. And we'll actually get into talking about that topic specifically much later. But it will be super fun, I think. So yeah. So social policy, social advocacy, and then looking at social innovation as a precursor to solutions. So you'll notice that I've skipped over some of the content from the reading for this chapter because it's a bit redundant. So you can look back at Module 0 for an introduction to sociology. I gave you a complete module that is more or less the same as what I would give to an intro to sociology course. And this is really important if you've never taken Soc 1 or if you've never taken Introduction to Sociology. You should definitely go back and review it again and again until you understand it. Another area is the science of social problems, or the science of sociology, which talks about how sociology is a social science, and talks about research and applied research, variables, hypotheses, all of that stuff. I'm going to give you a page in Module 2 with notes and videos that are related to this, and you can review that, and also some supplemental videos. All right, so have fun working your way through the content for this module, and I'll see you again soon.